It is not the sound of his voice that speaks most loudly. It is the silence that arrives and stays. Not as an accident, but as a signal. You may ask, why hasn't he messaged? But a wiser question is, what does his silence awaken in me? Because communication is never just about words. It's about presence. And when someone's presence begins to vanish, you must learn to listen to the absence. In this space, something sacred happens, not in the external world, but within you. A quiet shift from reaction to realization, from waiting to watching, from grasping to grounding. Believe it or not, when he doesn't call or message you, it means something. But not always what your heart, in its moment of fear or longing, is tempted to assume. There is a quiet truth here, and to find it, we must shift from the surface of reaction to the depth of perception. When someone goes silent, especially someone with whom you've shared words, warmth, or intimate emotions, it triggers an ancient part of your being. The human nervous system is biologically wired to fear disconnection. Evolutionarily speaking, silence from a member of our tribe could signal rejection, danger, or abandonment. And so today, when he doesn't call or respond, your body still remembers that primal fear. But in a modern world where silence can come from distraction rather than danger, from personal overwhelm rather than betrayal, it becomes essential to reinterpret what this silence really means. Silence reflects energy, not always intention. The lack of a message may not be a deliberate insult, nor a conscious attempt to hurt. More often, it reflects where a person is within themselves. Not everyone has the capacity to hold space for connection. Not everyone knows how to meet silence with clarity or respond to vulnerability with presence. You may be expecting a reply from someone whose emotional fuel tank is empty. Someone who is not withholding communication, but simply incapable of showing up with the energy that real connection demands. This truth can be painful, especially when you know what you've invested. Perhaps you've poured kindness into your messages, spoken from the heart, or offered consistency. But here is a subtle yet powerful principle from Eastern philosophy. When you plant seeds, you do not immediately demand a harvest. You offer without attachment to result. This doesn't mean becoming passive. It means becoming perceptive, because silence is not neutral. It carries energy. And that energy, when you learn to feel it without ego or desperation, will teach you whether this person's silence is temporary or a sign of deeper emotional avoidance. Let us consider a story. A woman once shared that she had been seeing a man for several months. In the beginning, the messages came regularly. Sweet good mornings, questions about her day, plans for weekends. Slowly, those messages became more infrequent. At first, she rationalized it, work pressure, distractions, maybe even his need for space. But soon, a week passed without a word. She reached out gently, and still nothing. Her mind raced. Did I say something wrong? Is he losing interest? Should I confront him or wait? Eventually, he messaged, casually, as if no gap had occurred, but her body had already registered the inconsistency. When she came to me, she asked, "Does this mean he doesn't care?" I asked her instead, "How does his silence feel in your body?" She paused. "Heavy," she said, "like I'm not safe to trust his presence." That moment was her truth. Not his words, not the excuse he eventually gave about being busy, but the energy his silence carried, and the energy it awakened in her. Silence reflects more than a lack of sound. It reveals the emotional atmosphere of the other person. In this atmosphere, some people offer warmth, others bring confusion. Some are like still water, clear and calm. Others are like fog, hazy and uncertain. When he doesn't call or message, ask yourself not what he's thinking, but what you are feeling. This doesn't mean obsessing over fear, but becoming aware. Is your energy rising in peace or sinking in self-doubt? That feeling is data. That is the wisdom your nervous system is offering you, if only you will pause and listen. Which brings us to a second truth. Your nervous system can sense disconnection before your mind accepts it. In psychology, this is often described as a gut feeling, but neuroscience has made this far more precise. The vagus nerve, the primary nerve of the parasympathetic system, communicates directly between your brain and your body, especially your heart and gut. It detects subtle signals of stress, disconnection, or inconsistency far before your conscious thoughts do. That tension you feel when you've waited all day for a message that never arrives. That's not just emotional discomfort. It's your physiology registering relational uncertainty. In Eastern teachings, we often say that the body is more honest than the mind. Your thoughts may try to justify his silence. He's probably tired. He's bad at texting. He'll come around. But your body knows. Your heartbeat, your breath, your sleep. These respond to emotional safety or its absence. A woman once shared how she used to check her phone every 10 minutes, waiting for a man who said he cared but rarely followed through. I felt anxious all day, she confessed. Even when he finally messaged, I was already drained. What she didn't realize then was that her body had been screaming for emotional clarity long before her mind admitted that this relationship was not feeding her, but starving her. When a man goes silent, he might not be trying to hurt you, but your nervous system still experiences it as emotional withdrawal. This is why waiting in uncertainty can be so exhausting. Your brain activates the stress response, the same system triggered by physical danger, because to your emotional system, inconsistency is a threat. Now, imagine you are not only experiencing this once, but repeatedly over time. What happens? Your body adapts, you become numb, or overly reactive, or clingy. Not because you're too emotional, but because the body is trying to protect you from the pain of unpredictability. So what do we do with this knowledge? We begin by listening to the body without judgment. Instead of labeling your anxiety as weakness, see it as wisdom. Instead of blaming yourself for caring, thank your system for being so sensitive to energy. Because in relationships, your awareness is your strength, not your desperation. The more you attune to your own signals, the less you need to chase clarity outside of yourself. Let us pause here for a moment. Imagine a pond, still, undisturbed. When a stone is thrown in, the ripples spread quickly. Now, imagine that instead of a stone, it is silence that disturbs your peace. The ripples are your thoughts. The more you try to chase the source, the more the water stirs. But when you allow the silence to be what it is, the ripples fade, and the clarity returns. That pond is your inner world, and the stillness you cultivate is not for the other person's sake. It is for your own restoration. Here's the profound paradox. The more you need someone to explain their silence, the more power you have given away. But when you sit with that silence, breathe through it, and feel its weight without running from it, something shifts. You begin to see that the silence is not empty. It is full of answers. You stop asking, why didn't he message? And begin to ask, why did I attach so deeply to his presence to feel abandoned by his absence? This question doesn't weaken you, it empowers you. There is an ancient Zen teaching that says, when the archer misses the target, he turns and seeks the fault within himself. This is not about blame, it is about mastery. You cannot control who messages you. You cannot control how someone communicates. But you can master your response. You can train yourself not to chase, not to panic, and not to collapse into fear. You can build an inner temple where your worth is not measured by the pings of a phone, but by the quiet confidence of your own self-regard. So what does it mean when he doesn't call or message? It may mean he is emotionally unavailable. It may mean he is distracted. It may mean he is not aligned with your emotional frequency. But most importantly, it means you are being invited to return to yourself. To stop outsourcing your peace. To reconnect with the intelligence of your own body. To say, if this silence continues, I will not fill it with stories. I will feel it, and I will act, not react, from a place of truth. There is power in that stillness. A woman who is grounded in her body, attuned to her nervous system, and clear about her emotional needs becomes unshakable. She no longer needs to chase answers. She is the answer. And even if he does eventually message, it will not define her reality. Because her worth was never tied to his timing. It was rooted in her awareness all along. This is the first step toward emotional maturity in love, shifting from interpretation to observation, from reaction to realization, from confusion to clarity. And the body is your first teacher. Let the silence speak, but do not let it define you. Let it teach you. Let it reveal who is truly meant to walk beside you, and who is only passing through as a lesson in self-mastery. Because when you stop fearing the silence, you begin to hear your own soul clearly. And that voice is the one you've been waiting for. Attachment craves answers, but awareness offers peace. This is a distinction most people only come to understand after heartbreak, after long periods of waiting, after repeated lessons of emotional confusion and relational discomfort. It is not something we are taught as children, nor something we absorb easily from society, which conditions us to seek external validation and confirmation. And so when a man stops calling or messaging, the instinctive reaction is to look outward. Why did he change? What does his silence mean? Did I do something wrong? Was it something I said? But what we often forget is that these questions arise not only from curiosity, but from fear. More specifically, they emerge from the wounded voice of attachment. In psychology, we understand that attachment styles are formed early in life, shaped by how our caregivers responded to our needs, to our cries, to our silences. A child who was seen, held, and soothed learns that connection is safe and dependable. But a child who was ignored or inconsistently attended to learns that love can be withdrawn at any moment, and so grows up craving reassurance, validation, and emotional certainty. When that child becomes an adult, the patterns do not vanish. They simply evolve. The emotional need may now take the shape of a message waiting to be read, or a call that never comes. But the body reacts the same. The anxious pull in the chest, the overthinking, the refreshing of the phone screen, the sleepless night wondering why someone has withdrawn without explanation. That is not you being dramatic. It is your attachment system attempting to regulate a perceived threat. It is your nervous system, conditioned by the past, reaching out for safety. Yet, here lies the opportunity for transformation. Instead of chasing answers in someone else's behavior, you begin to ask, what part of me is feeling abandoned? Why does this silence feel like rejection rather than redirection? This shift, from external questioning to internal awareness, is not a retreat. It is a return to your own center, your own capacity to sit with discomfort and allow it to teach you rather than torment you. There is a quote from Lao Tzu that speaks to this beautifully. When I let go of what I am, I become what I might be. In the same way, when you let go of the need to be answered, you become open to hearing yourself more clearly. The craving for closure, the search for meaning in someone's silence, begins to dissolve. Not because you have given up, but because you have grown up emotionally. You stop trying to complete someone else's sentence and start completing your own sentence. Your own story, your own inner alignment. A woman once came forward and described how she had fallen deeply for a man who swept her into a whirlwind of connection. He was attentive, expressive, romantic, but after a few months, the energy shifted. The frequency of communication lessened. The warmth cooled. She began to text more, trying to keep the rhythm alive. His replies became shorter, sometimes delayed, sometimes absent. She felt the panic rise, like a tide swallowing her stillness. If I could just understand, she said. If he would just explain, I could be at peace. But that was the trap, waiting for peace from a person who could no longer offer it. She had mistaken attachment for clarity. Her nervous system was still hoping he would reassure her. But her deeper self already knew the truth. What she needed was not his explanation. It was her own awareness. Her healing began the moment she stopped pursuing his voice and started listening to her own breath, her own intuition, her own unspoken knowing. This is the power of awareness. It is not passive. It is not indifferent. It is fiercely present. It recognizes the moment when attachment becomes a form of self-abandonment. It allows you to say, even if I don't get the answer I want, I will remain rooted in the truth I feel. That kind of awareness can only be cultivated in stillness, in the space between stimulus and response. And in that space, you discover that your peace was never dependent on a phone call or a message. It was waiting for you all along, just beneath the noise of expectation. In Eastern philosophy, the practice of non-attachment does not mean disconnection. It means presence without grasping. It means loving without clinging. It means caring deeply without becoming entangled in someone else's chaos. To practice non-attachment in relationships is to say, I honor you, but I will not abandon myself for you. I will feel the sadness, the longing, the confusion, but I will not let it control my center. Now, imagine this. You are sitting in a garden. You've planted seeds of connection, of love, of effort. Some are sprouting. Others remain buried. Do you dig them up in anxiety, wondering if they are growing? Or do you trust the process, nurture the soil, and tend to your own light. When a man does not message or call, it may feel like the garden is barren. But perhaps it is simply not your season with him, or perhaps his silence is the sign that his soil was never fertile enough to begin with. Awareness brings this clarity. It helps you discern what is yours to grow and what is not. And in doing so, it frees you from the endless cycle of seeking answers that may never arrive and opens you to a deeper form of knowing, one that requires no permission, no explanation, no reply. Which brings us now to a subtle but powerful insight. If his silence feels like a message, it probably is. There is a common illusion in relationships that only words hold meaning, that unless someone articulates their thoughts, their behavior is unclear. But in reality, silence is often the loudest message of all. The absence of communication speaks. The withdrawal of energy speaks. The hesitation to show up with consistency, it speaks. And while we may be tempted to rationalize this, or fill in the blanks with our own stories, the truth is that silence rarely comes without intent. Even if that intent is unconscious, we must train ourselves to recognize silence not just as a pause in conversation, but as a mirror. What does his absence reflect about his emotional availability? What does it say about his readiness to engage, to connect, to co-create something stable with you? In many cases, the silence is not an answer that needs decoding. It is the answer. But we often resist this realization because it is painful. It asks us to confront what we hoped wasn't true. A young woman once told me about a man she dated for nearly a year. They had an intense connection, full of shared dreams and vulnerable exchanges. But periodically, he would vanish, sometimes for days, other times for weeks. When he returned, he always had reasons: work stress, family obligations, emotional overwhelm. She accepted these explanations, even empathized. But every disappearance left her more anxious, more depleted, more unsure of herself. She clung to his return as evidence of his care, ignoring the pattern that had already told the truth. Eventually, during one long silence, she realized something profound. "He doesn't need to say it," she said. "His absence already told me everything." That was the day she stopped waiting. That was the day she reclaimed her energy. And that was the day she discovered the wisdom behind silence. Not as punishment, but as protection. In martial arts, there is a concept known as reading the opponent's energy. You don't only observe their movements. You sense their intention, their readiness, their hesitations. In the same way, you can learn to read the energy behind someone's silence. Is it avoidance? Is it indifference? Is it emotional confusion? Is it fear of closeness? Each carries a different vibration. And when you become attuned to these subtleties, you no longer need to demand clarity. You simply observe and choose accordingly. This is not about judgment, it is about discernment. A man may not message because he is overwhelmed, or unsure, or emotionally distant. That is not necessarily a reflection of his malice, but it is a reflection of his capacity. And your awareness must include this truth. Consistency is not optional in a healthy connection. It is foundational. You cannot build emotional intimacy on a regular effort. You cannot feel safe with someone whose presence fluctuates like the wind. So when the silence comes, do not rush to fill it with explanations. Do not race to soothe it with self-doubt or fantasy. Let it echo. Let it vibrate. Let it say what it needs to say. And then ask yourself, is this silence opening space for me to grow? Or is it closing a door I've been afraid to acknowledge? Many women stay in emotional limbo for far too long, not because they don't know the answer, but because they hope the silence will eventually say something different. But it rarely does. The energy behind the silence is usually consistent, even if the words are not. And the sooner you learn to read that energy, the sooner you reclaim your time, your dignity, and your sense of peace. In the end, becoming aware of silence is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of wisdom. To say, this silence feels like distance, and I deserve presence. To say, his absence may not be cruel, but it is incompatible with what I seek. To say, I will not punish myself by holding space for someone who cannot even hold a conversation. These are the statements of emotional maturity. These are the choices of self-respecting awareness. And in making them, you stop looking for answers from people who disappear and start offering answers to yourself through the steady rhythm of your own breath, your own heart, your own unwavering commitment to inner truth. When a man stops calling or messaging, there is often a deep sense of discomfort that arises in a woman, not just because of the silence itself, but because of what the silence seems to suggest about her worth. In these moments, it is easy to slip into narratives that say, "I wasn't enough," or "If I had done something differently, he would still be here." But there is another perspective, one that doesn't chase or condemn, but observes with clarity. Emotional distance often mirrors energetic misalignment. This is not a flaw to fix, it is a signal to interpret. In Eastern philosophy, it is understood that every human being carries a unique vibration. Our energy is the byproduct of our thoughts, emotions, intentions, and habits. When we are aligned within, when our inner world is coherent, steady, and clean, we radiate a certain frequency that either resonates with another's or quietly repels them. This is not mystical, it's physiological. The heart produces an electromagnetic field that affects the nervous systems of those nearby. The coherence or incoherence of that field influences the quality of our interactions, often beyond words. So when a man pulls away, when he doesn't text back, or fails to return a call, it's not just a behavioral event. It is an energetic message. His distance may not always be conscious, but it is rarely random. In relationships, people respond not just to what you say, but to what they feel in your presence. And likewise, you respond to what you feel, whether you acknowledge it or not. Often, when you feel ignored or neglected, it's not simply because he isn't reaching out. It's because your energy is no longer resonating with his current state. The connection that once seemed natural may now feel disjointed, awkward, or out of rhythm. This is not a reason to despair. It's a reason to listen, not to his silence, but to your vibration. Who were you when he first showed up in your life? Were you grounded, curious, expressive? Were you soft yet strong in your boundaries? And who are you now? Did you begin to shift to hold on to him? Did your energy begin to operate from fear rather than trust? These questions are not meant to assign blame, but to reclaim agency. Your energy is your responsibility. Your alignment determines not only who is drawn to you, but who is repelled by you. Let me share the story of Aliyah, a woman in her mid-40s who found herself emotionally attached to a man who was inconsistent in his communication. In the early stages, they talked daily. Their exchanges were warm, humorous, and filled with future plans. But over time, the calls became infrequent, the replies shorter. The emotional connection began to fray. Each time he withdrew, Aliyah would panic. She would text more, call more, try harder. Her energy became anxious, unpredictable, and unconsciously heavy. She was still the same woman, but the frequency of her presence had changed. She had shifted from curiosity to control, from flow to fixation. What Aliyah didn't realize was that her vibration, once confident and whole, had become entangled in the outcome. She stopped being herself and started being a reaction. And that reaction changed the entire energy dynamic of the relationship. The man began to feel that pressure, not through words, but through resonance. And slowly, he began to withdraw even more. Not because she wasn't worthy of love, but because the energy no longer felt expansive, it felt contracted. The real turning point came not when he finally stopped replying to her altogether, but when Aliyah stopped replying to herself. She stopped checking in with her body, her spirit, her wisdom. She became a satellite orbiting someone else's signal, hoping for a broadcast that never came. But silence is sometimes the medicine we don't want to swallow. In her solitude, she began to feel again, not the absence of him, but the absence of herself. That grief, when fully embraced, became a doorway. She began meditating again, walking in nature, journaling without censorship. She revisited the music she loved, rekindled her friendships, and slowly her energy changed. Her vibration no longer pleaded, it pulsed. It no longer grasped, it grounded. And without needing to chase or explain anything, she noticed something fascinating. The man messaged her again. But this time, she didn't respond immediately. Not out of pride, but out of presence. She needed to feel her center before reacting. This is the secret many never realize. When you shift your energy, the world responds. Not always in the way you expect, but always in a way that mirrors your current state. A man may retreat when your vibration becomes chaotic. Not because he doesn't care, but because he cannot anchor himself in energy that seeks to possess rather than share. Alternatively, A man may draw closer when your vibration becomes open yet sovereign, warm yet self-contained. It is not about perfection, but alignment. The most magnetic energy is not loud or performative. It is calm and clear. One of the reasons energy plays such a powerful role in relationships is because humans are wired to detect emotional congruence. Through mirror neurons, the brain picks up on subtle cues of safety or danger, authenticity or performance. You cannot fake alignment. You cannot pretend to be calm while your inner world is in chaos. People feel the dissonance, even if they don't know how to articulate it. And in men, especially, this plays a strong role. If a man senses emotional overinvestment before mutual commitment, he may subconsciously associate that with a loss of freedom or emotional overwhelm. Not because love is wrong, but because the energy is no longer balanced. A woman named Lian once told me that the moment she stopped trying to force clarity from a man who had become distant, she experienced a new kind of clarity in herself. She said, "I always thought he was the unpredictable one. But now I see, I was the one sending out confusing energy. I said I trusted the process, but I was constantly trying to control the outcome. I said I was open to whatever happened, but I was obsessively checking my phone." He didn't need to say anything. He just responded to what I was unconsciously broadcasting. That insight changed everything. She didn't need to become less emotional or more stoic. She just needed to come back into alignment. When she did, her energy became clean. And with that cleanliness came empowerment. She no longer waited for texts. She waited for resonance. And if it didn't come, she didn't collapse. She redirected her energy inward. She honored her own vibration more than someone else's attention. In Qigong and internal martial arts, practitioners learn to cultivate a field of internal stillness that is stronger than external turbulence. They move slowly, deliberately, not to show off grace but to master their own energetic presence. In relationships, the same principle applies. If your emotional field is centered and consistent, then you are not easily thrown off by someone else's inconsistency. You observe, you feel, you choose. And from that centered space, you gain clarity. Not because someone spelled it out for you, but because you became attuned to the silent language of energy. This brings us to a profound truth. Energy does not lie. Words can deceive, gestures can mislead, but energy remains honest. A man may say he cares, but if his actions are distant, you feel the truth in your body. You feel the absence even in the presence. Or he may say little, but his energy is steady, his presence grounding. And that too tells you everything. The more you refine your ability to sense energetic coherence, the less likely you are to get caught in emotional traps. You begin to listen not just with your ears, but with your nervous system. You begin to understand that a message delayed is a message delivered. That a call never made is a call you didn't need. But this level of discernment requires inner stillness. It requires you to step back from the noise of craving and come home to the silence of being. This is not resignation. It is awareness. And from that awareness, you act not from impulse, but from alignment. You no longer ask, "Why hasn't he called?" You ask, "What is the quality of energy I want to welcome into my life? And is this energy a match?" This is how you transform your relationships, not by changing others, but by fine-tuning your frequency. In the spiritual discipline of mindfulness, we are taught to observe the breath without trying to control it. To sit with thoughts without becoming entangled in them. The same is true in relationships. You observe the pattern without over-interpreting. You watch the energy without trying to dominate it. If a man pulls away, you don't chase, you breathe. You don't invent explanations, you reflect. And from that inner space, wisdom arises. It is the wisdom that says, some people leave not because you are unworthy, but because your growth no longer matches their stagnation. Or, silence is not always a punishment. It is sometimes a redirection to your own path. Or, my worth is not confirmed by attention, but by the integrity of my own vibration. And as this wisdom deepens, you become less concerned with how often someone texts and more curious about how their energy makes you feel. Do you feel uplifted or drained? Expanded or anxious? At home or off balance? These are not small questions. They are the foundations of self-honoring relationships. The story of Mariah offers a final illustration. After years of chasing emotionally unavailable men, she began to study energy work. She learned how to sense when her heart was open and when it was reactive. She began treating herself with the love she once demanded from others. And eventually, she attracted a man who didn't just say the right things, but whose energy felt steady, calming, and clean. I used to chase chemistry, she said. Now I choose coherence. I choose peace. What we call silence from another is often a sacred invitation to return to our own signal, to tune it, to elevate it, to protect it. When a man doesn't message you, you can become smaller, or you can become still. Still enough to feel what your energy has been saying all along. Still enough to choose yourself without apology. Still enough to honor the frequency of love without needing it to come from anyone else but you. Sometimes, the most painful silence in a relationship is not when a man ignores you, but when you begin to ignore yourself in pursuit of him. When he doesn't message you, it feels personal. It stirs the emotional body, sets off old insecurities, and creates a hunger for validation. But this hunger is not born in his absence. It existed before he arrived. His silence only brought it into light. And what you do in that moment, how you respond to your own longing, becomes the most important decision you make. Because here is the deeper truth. When a man doesn't reach out, the pain you feel is not about him. It's about what part of yourself you're abandoning to try and hold on to him. In Eastern thought, this moment of tension is known as the gap. The gap is the space between expectation and reality, between the desire for connection and the experience of distance. Most people try to leap over this gap with action. Send another text, analyze his last message, replay conversations, consult friends, scroll his social media. But the wisest among us do something else. They sit still in the gap. They listen to what the silence is revealing. They ask, who am I becoming in this space? To grow through the gap, you must practice emotional sovereignty. This means learning how to remain internally whole, even when someone externally does not fulfill your need for contact or connection. Emotional sovereignty is not detachment in the cold sense. It is deep, rooted presence in yourself. It is the strength to stay with your own emotions without outsourcing your worth to someone else's behavior. It is the courage to say, yes, I feel disappointed, I feel neglected, but I will not betray myself to chase closeness that is not being offered freely. There was once a woman named Sophia. In the early months of dating a man she deeply cared for, she noticed that sometimes after they had a beautiful, intimate evening together, he would go completely silent for 2 or 3 days. No message, no call, no explanation. Each time it triggered a storm of emotions in her: fear, confusion, anger. She would write long texts, delete them, cry, meditate, and then eventually send a brief message like, just checking in, hope all is okay. Sometimes he'd respond casually, sometimes not at all. But over time something changed, not in him but in her. She began journaling after these silences. She stopped making his lack of communication mean something about her worth. She started asking a deeper question. Why does his silence feel so devastating to me? What wound is it touching? And slowly, she uncovered that she had been trained since childhood to overfunction in relationships, to fix, to please, to be agreeable, to avoid rejection at all costs. When someone pulled away, she didn't just feel sad, she felt invisible. In one of her reflections, she wrote, "Every time he doesn't message me, my inner child thinks she disappeared." That realization was powerful, because it gave her a doorway into healing. She stopped trying to change his behavior and started trying to stay with herself. Instead of sending texts during those silences, she lit candles. She sat with her discomfort. She breathed through it. She whispered to herself, "I see you. You are here. You are not disappearing." And what she discovered was that her emotional body began to settle. Not because he changed, but because she stopped abandoning herself. Self-abandonment is one of the most subtle yet damaging habits in relationships. It happens every time you pretend you're okay with behavior that violates your standards. It happens when you smile while your heart aches, when you chase connection at the cost of your dignity, when you make someone else's presence more important than your own peace. But emotional maturity begins when you stop making your needs invisible in order to feel loved. It begins when you realize that honoring your emotional reality is not weakness, it is wisdom. In neuroscience, the concept of interoception, refers to your brain's ability to sense internal states, heartbeat, hunger, tension, breath. The more you strengthen interoception, the better you become at identifying what you truly feel. In relationships, this translates into emotional clarity. You don't just react, you respond from awareness. When a man doesn't message you, instead of spiraling into stories about rejection, you pause. You breathe. You ask, what sensation is in my body right now? What emotion is here? And what does it need from me? Not from him. This is the practice of emotional self-care at its highest level, and it creates a foundation for authentic connection. Because a woman who knows how to hold her emotions without outsourcing them becomes deeply attractive, not in the surface sense, but energetically. She becomes magnetic, grounded, unshakable. She doesn't chase love, she embodies it. She doesn't beg for validation. She validates her own emotional truth. A man may or may not return to that kind of woman. But if he does, it is not because she manipulated or persuaded him. It is because her energy became clear. And if he doesn't, she doesn't fall apart. Because she didn't wait for a man to complete her. She waited for herself to return. Let's talk about energy and clarity for a moment. In martial arts, the master knows that the opponent's move is not the real threat. It is your reaction that determines the outcome. If you overextend, lose your center, panic, you become easy to unbalance. But if you remain steady, grounded, aware, then even a powerful strike can be absorbed and redirected. The same is true in emotional relationships. A man's withdrawal is not inherently harmful. What causes suffering is your internal collapse in response. And so, the invitation is this: the next time someone doesn't message you, treat it not as rejection, but as revelation. Let it reveal your emotional habits. Let it show you where you grasp, where you fear, where you disarm yourself. And then choose differently. Choose to come back home. There is a profound quote by the mystic Rumi. Don't get lost in your pain. Know that one day your pain will become your cure. The pain of being ignored, of not hearing from someone you care about, can become your greatest medicine if you are willing to listen to it without trying to numb it. The moment you stop making that man's silence more powerful than your own presence, you begin the journey of true self-mastery. There was once a young woman named Hannah who came to a temple in the mountains to seek peace. She told the teacher, "I gave everything to a man who no longer speaks to me. I feel empty." The teacher, without saying a word, poured her a cup of tea, but he didn't stop pouring. The tea spilled over the edge, dripped onto the table, then the floor. Hannah cried out, "Stop, it's overflowing." The teacher said calmly, "Yes, just like your heart. You kept pouring without checking if the cup was full or if it was even still there. You gave and gave to a space that was no longer able or willing to receive. Now your task is not to chase the broken cup. Your task is to learn how to pour back into yourself." This story illustrates a deep truth. When a man doesn't message you, it may not be about you. It may be about his own emotional limitations, his avoidance of intimacy, or his inability to meet you where you are. But that is his journey, not yours. Yours is to remain centered in your integrity, to practice not collapsing into someone else's absence, but expanding in your own presence. We live in a culture that teaches women to overextend themselves for love, to prove their worth through constant availability, emotional labor, and patience. But true love begins where self-betrayal ends. If a man pulls away, and your first instinct is to question your worth, pause. That is the moment to practice something radical: self-inquiry over self-doubt. Ask yourself, what part of me believes I am only worthy if I am pursued? What fear am I trying to escape by holding on to someone who is not holding on to me? These questions do not guarantee answers right away, but they open a deeper awareness, one that leads to healing. Healing does not always look like becoming invulnerable. Sometimes it looks like learning to sit with your longing without letting it define you. Sometimes it means grieving the idea of a relationship more than the reality of it. Sometimes it means realizing that his silence is not a mystery to solve, but a space for you to listen to your own inner voice, the one that's been waiting for your attention for far too long. And when you turn inward, when you truly start listening, not to your fears, but to your wisdom, you begin to experience a shift. You don't feel desperate to be chosen because you have already chosen yourself. You don't chase love because you recognize that love is not something you find, it is something you become. This does not make you cold. It makes you clear. It allows you to love from fullness, not emptiness. It means that when love comes, and it will, you can meet it without clinging, without fear, without the need to lose yourself to keep someone else. A woman who has stopped abandoning herself is a woman who transforms silence into strength, longing into wisdom, and rejection into redirection. And that woman, grounded, present, radiant in her truth, becomes the kind of presence a man either rises to meet or respectfully walks away from. Either way, she remains whole, because she has learned the most essential practice of all. No matter who comes or goes, she stays. She stays with herself. She stays present. She stays aligned. And that, above all else, is what makes her truly powerful. So what does it really mean when he doesn't call or message you? It may mean that he is uncertain, that he is emotionally unavailable, that he is distracted or not ready or unwilling to meet you where you stand. But more importantly, it means this is a moment not to chase him, but to choose yourself. It means you are being given an opportunity, an invitation not to react impulsively from fear or lack, but to respond with presence and clarity, to turn inward instead of outward, to master the discomfort instead of escaping it. When someone's silence enters your life, it does not have to become your suffering. It can become your signal, a signal to pause, to breathe, to remember your peace is not dependent on someone else's consistency. Your value does not decrease when someone fails to recognize it. And your wholeness is never in question simply because another person could not hold space for it. The way someone else handles connection reflects their journey. But the way you handle distance, that reflects your inner mastery. This is not about indifference. It is not about shutting down your heart or pretending you don't care. It is about keeping your heart open while your boundaries remain intact. It is about loving fully without losing yourself. And it is about understanding that not every silence is a punishment. Some silences are a redirection. Some silences are sacred space, asking you to return home to your truth. In Eastern philosophy, there is a principle known as Wu Wei, effortless action. It teaches us that there is power in allowing things to unfold naturally, not forcing, not begging, not chasing, simply aligning with the rhythm of life and listening closely to what is being shown, even in stillness. When he doesn't message you, listen, not to your fear, but to your wisdom. What do you need in that moment? Not from him, but from yourself. Stability, reassurance, patience, courage. Give it to yourself. Every time you meet your own need with grace, you become less dependent on unpredictable circumstances and more rooted in unshakable self-trust. And in that energy, something remarkable happens. You stop needing to convince anyone of your worth. You begin to embody it. And the people who are aligned with your energy, they feel it. They meet you there. They communicate. They show up. They stay present. Not because you demanded it, but because you no longer settle for less. So if his silence has become a mirror, use it well. Not to judge yourself, but to remember yourself. Not to diminish your light, but to protect it. Not to question your love, but to strengthen the vessel that holds it. You are not here to chase what withdraws. You are here to rise in the presence of what remains uncertain. To live, to breathe, to feel, and to return to the sacred truth. You are whole, even in the absence of a reply. You are loved, even when not affirmed by someone else's voice. And you are powerful, not when he calls, but when you answer the call of your own soul. That is the essence of self-mastery. That is the path of the wise. And that is where your transformation truly begins.